A small request before starting the video. If you love the channel's topic, then subscribe to the channel now and press the bell icon next to it. Because one of your subscriptions encourages me to make better videos. What happened on Y&R today? Nick and Sharon reignite old feelings. The Young and the Restless episode on Wednesday, July 23, 2025, featured Nick and Sharon trapped and trying to figure out how to escape, while Kane continued to face the heat. Kyle exposed Audra's true intentions, and Victor found himself caught in the middle of all the chaos. In the dining area, Victor, Eric Braden, found Nikki, Melody Thomas Scott, pacing anxiously. He explained that he tried to follow Carter, Vincent Stalba, but had been blocked by the Abbotts. Victor shared his growing concerns about Nick, Joshua Morrow, and Sharon Case, safety, admitting that Carter seemed oddly robotic and unsettling. Nikki agreed, noting that they could only trust their family. Meanwhile, Kyle, Michael Mealer, confronted Victor, accusing him of funding Audra's, Zuleika Silver, scheme to ruin his relationship with Claire, Haley Aaron. Kyle was furious and told Victor that he and Claire would move in together as soon as he returned home, a declaration that Victor didn't seem to care about. Despite this, Kyle was determined to expose Victor's involvement. As Victor left, Kyle turned to Nikki and expressed his concerns about the deal between Audra and Victor. Nikki seemed sympathetic, agreeing that it was despicable, but Kyle still wanted to get to the truth. Chance's suspicions and Kane's denial. In the meantime, Chance, Connor Floyd, was suspicious of Carter's involvement and wondered if he was covering for Kane, Billy Flynn. Chance explained that he had received conflicting stories from Carter and the groundskeeper about Damien's, Jermaine Rivers, death. He was starting to believe that Carter could be hiding something, and Victor jumped to the conclusion that Carter might be working for Kane, or even killing for him. Kane, on the other hand, was still in his office, trying to recover the footage from the murder, and Amanda, Miss Hale Morgan, wasn't impressed with his excuses. She demanded to know if he was tampering with evidence, but Kane denied it, insisting he had nothing to do with Damien's death. Amanda pressed him on the possibility of Nick erasing the footage, but Kane was sure Nick wasn't the killer. Amanda urged Kane to release Nick, fearing the situation would only blow up in his face if he didn't. Sharon and Nick's bond grows stronger. Meanwhile, Sharon and Nick, still trapped in the storage room, shared an emotional moment as they reminisced about old times. They laughed about Nick's bad hair days and the mullet years, which lightened the mood. Sharon admitted that being with Nick felt natural, and they both acknowledged the comfort in each other's company, even in such dire circumstances. They began to speculate on what Kane was up to and how little they could do to stop him. As Nick tried to kick the door open, he realized it was a futile effort. They looked for something to pick the lock and stumbled upon old wine bottles, books, and photos. Nick had an idea and used an old champagne bottle to help pick the lock, and Sharon managed to start working on it. They wondered how Kane amassed his fortune and what he was planning next. Audra, Lily, and Phyllis clash over Kane's guilt. Audra ran into Lily, Crystal Khalil, and offered her condolences about Damien's death. They discussed how difficult it would be to tell Nate, Sean Dominic, and Amy, Valerie Pettiford, but they were interrupted by a noise in the hedge, which caused them to hide behind a statue. They later realized it was Phyllis, Michelle Stafford, who had been eavesdropping. Phyllis defended herself, claiming that she was simply trying to find clues about the killer, which led to a heated argument between her, Lily, and Audra. Lily remained convinced that Kane was responsible for Damien's death, while Phyllis defended him, insisting he didn't kill Damien. Phyllis pushed Lily to look at the situation objectively and consider that there was no way Kane could have been involved. What happened on Y&R today? Nick and Sharon reignite old feelings. On today's emotionally charged episode of The Young and the Restless, old flames flickered back to life as Nick Newman and Sharon Newman found themselves pulled into a familiar orbit that longtime fans know all too well. In a town where power plays, betrayals, and corporate chess matches often dominate the headlines, it was a quiet, intimate moment between two former soulmates that stole the spotlight, and possibly changed everything. From the moment Nick walked into Crimson Lights and spotted Sharon behind the counter, there was an unmistakable shift in the air. The history between them, decades of love, heartbreak, children, and second chances, hung thickly between every exchanged glance. Viewers of The Young and the Restless know that Nick and Sharon's connection has always been more than just nostalgia. It's unfinished business wrapped in shared trauma, deep loyalty, and a bond that refuses to break no matter how many times life pulls them apart. Nick didn't come looking for romance. At least, that's what he told himself. With Newman Enterprises drama escalating and Victor tightening his grip on the family empire, Nick has been stretched thin. But when he admitted to Sharon that he feels like he's constantly fighting battles that never truly end, something in his voice cracked. Sharon noticed. She always does. Sharon, for her part, has been navigating her own emotional terrain. Between lingering guilt over past mistakes and her endless efforts to keep the peace for their children, she has tried to convince herself that the past is best left there. But today, as she listened to Nick talk about feeling lost despite his success, her walls began to crumble. She reminded him that he doesn't have to carry everything alone, a statement that clearly struck deeper than either of them expected. Their conversation took a vulnerable turn when Nick confessed that no matter where life takes him, Sharon has always been his safe place. The line wasn't delivered as a grand romantic declaration. It was soft. Honest. Almost hesitant. And that made it all the more powerful. Sharon's eyes filled with emotion as she admitted that she has felt the same way for years but was too afraid to risk reopening old wounds. The timing couldn't be more complicated. Nick's loyalty to his family, especially to Victor, has always clashed with Sharon's independent spirit. And yet, today, the conflict seemed to fade into the background. For once, they weren't Newman versus the world. They were simply Nick and Sharon, two people who have loved each other in every possible season of life. Meanwhile, elsewhere in Genoa City, tensions continue to rise. Victor Newman is as calculating as ever, making strategic moves that could destabilize not only his enemies but his own children. While he didn't share scenes directly with Nick today, his presence loomed large. Nick's frustration with the endless power struggles clearly fed into his emotional vulnerability with Sharon. The question now is whether Victor will sense the shift in his son's priorities, and if he'll see Sharon as a distraction or a threat. Adding another layer of complexity is Phyllis Summers, who remains fiercely protective of her place in Nick's world. Though she wasn't front and center in today's episode, her shadow lingers over any potential chic reunion. Phyllis has. Back at Crimson Lights, the turning point came when Sharon gently reached for Nick's hand. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't rushed. It was instinctive. For a brief second, both seemed surprised by the contact, but neither pulled away. The silence between them spoke volumes. Years of misunderstandings, reconciliations, and heartbreak seemed to melt into a single shared breath. Nick admitted that he's tired of pretending he doesn't still feel something. Sharon countered that feelings don't disappear just because life gets complicated. That exchange alone sent social media into a frenzy, with fans debating whether this marks the beginning of a full-blown reunion or simply a momentary lapse into nostalgia. What makes this development so compelling is the maturity in their interaction. This isn't the impulsive, star-crossed romance of their youth. This is two adults who have weathered storms separately and are now wondering if they might be stronger together. The writing leaned into subtlety rather than spectacle, allowing the actors to convey volumes with lingering looks and restrained emotion. Of course, Genoa City rarely allows happiness to bloom without interference. Adam Newman's ongoing turmoil, Sally Spectra's complicated love life, and the ever-shifting alliances within the Newman and Abbott families all threaten to create ripple effects that could disrupt Nick and Sharon's fragile reconnection. In this town, love stories are never isolated, they are deeply intertwined with corporate ambition and family legacy. By the episode's final moments, Nick and Sharon stood outside crimson lights as evening settled over the city. Nick hesitated before leaving, clearly wrestling with whether to cross a line that would change everything. Sharon, equally torn, whispered that maybe it's time they stop running from what's always been there. The episode ended not with a kiss, but with possibility. That restraint may be the most telling clue of all. Instead of rushing into a reunion, the show appears to be laying the groundwork for a slow-burn rekindling that honors their complicated history. For long-time viewers, this feels like a return to emotional roots. For newer fans, it's an invitation to witness why Nick and Sharon remain one of the most enduring couples in daytime drama. The big question now is whether they can overcome the external pressures that have torn them apart before. Victor's influence, Phyllis's inevitable reaction, and their own lingering fears could easily derail this fragile spark. But if today's episode proved anything, it's that some connections refuse to fade. As Genoa City braces for the fallout of corporate schemes and family rivalries, it may be a quiet confession at a neighborhood coffee shop that ends up reshaping the emotional landscape of the entire canvas. Nick and Sharon's old feelings aren't just resurfacing, they're demanding to be acknowledged. The emotional ripple effects of Nick and Sharon's charged reunion didn't stop when the credits rolled. If anything, today's episode of The Young and the Restless planted seeds that are poised to grow into a full-blown storm across Genoa City. After that lingering moment outside crimson lights, Nick drove home in silence, clearly distracted. The weight of what almost happened, or perhaps what is about to happen, followed him like a shadow. For years, Nick has tried to compartmentalize his feelings for Sharon, convincing himself that history belongs in the past. But today shattered that illusion. The vulnerability in her voice, the softness in her touch, the familiarity of their connection, it all came rushing back with undeniable force. Sharon, meanwhile, remained at crimson lights long after closing. Alone in the quiet cafe, she replayed every word they shared. For someone who has spent years rebuilding her sense of stability, reopening the door to Nick feels both exhilarating and terrifying. She knows firsthand how their love story can turn turbulent when outside forces intervene. But she also knows that what they share is rare, and perhaps irreplaceable. Elsewhere, subtle warning signs began to flicker. Faith sensed something different in her parents. Though no grand announcements were made, children often feel emotional shifts before they're spoken aloud. Faith's hopeful expression when Nick mentioned stopping by crimson lights again did not go unnoticed. Could she become the quiet supporter of a reunion, or will she fear the instability that could follow? Across town, Victor remained focused on business, but never underestimate the mustache's instincts. Even without direct confrontation, Victor's awareness of his children's emotional lives is razor-sharp. If Nick begins prioritizing Sharon over Newman's strategy, Victor will take note. And history has proven that Victor does not hesitate to interfere when he believes family loyalty is at stake. Adding to the tension is the inevitable question of Phyllis. While she may not have appeared in the episode's central scenes, her presence lingers like a ticking clock. Phyllis has always viewed Sharon as both rival and reminder, a symbol of the one love she could never fully eclipse. Should word reach her that Nick and Sharon are reconnecting, the fallout could be explosive. Phyllis does not retreat quietly. She strategizes. She reacts. She fights. What makes this possible reunion especially compelling is how grounded it feels. There were no dramatic declarations or sweeping gestures, just two people confronting emotions they never fully resolved. In many ways, today's episode highlighted growth. Nick acknowledged his exhaustion with endless battles. Sharon admitted her fear of repeating past mistakes. Instead of blaming each other for what went wrong before, they seemed ready to explore what could go right now. Still, Genoa City thrives on complications. Adam's unpredictable behavior could easily spill into Nick's personal life. Sally's ongoing romantic entanglements may intersect in unexpected ways. And with corporate maneuvering constantly shifting alliances, emotional decisions rarely remain isolated. The final scene of the episode lingered not on action, but on anticipation. Sharon locked up crimson lights and stepped outside, pausing as if half expecting Nick to return. He didn't, but the possibility hung in the air. That restraint suggests the show is preparing for a slow build rather than an impulsive leap. And sometimes, slow burns ignite the biggest fires.
Cow ki food item, bhushi, gomer bhushi, yeah, food item. Wow, nice kabadi. Nice cover and